Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time for favorites. I just love this time of year when we are all sort of reflecting back on the past year's reading and sifting or mining through for the nuggets of gold in the piles. And I have quite a sizable pile, but many nuggets of gold in there. So lots of great stuff that I wanted to highlight as favorites of the year. This is not a ranked list. This is going to be quite long because I have not narrowed down my lists really to a certain number. I'm not capping myself. I'm just going to tell you about the books I absolutely loved and were special to me. Oddly, this is not all my highest rated books. Some of these had flaws that were clear but have really stuck with me in my mind, and so I absolutely have to say they were favorites. So I'm separating my fiction and nonfiction lists because my fiction list is going to be pretty long, and my nonfiction list is also pretty long. So I think I have 8 books here to tell you about, share with you, and hope that you will try them out and hopefully love them as much as I do. So let's dive into the books that were my favorite reads in nonfiction in 2023. I'm about 100 years late on this first one, but I absolutely loved A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. So this was adapted from speeches that she was giving on the topic of kind of women in creative spaces. And she goes through kind of picking apart how men have systems in place and support structures for them to be able to do creative endeavors. And women need those spaces in order for that to exist for them. And so she is both tackling these systemic injustices in a way, and also sort of imploring the ideas that she has for women to build those same kinds of support structures and what is needed in order for women to move forward, having their voices heard. And so I just loved that this was 100 years old and still felt very timely. I can see how far we've come in those spaces that she was recommending, but we also have a long way to go. And it just hit home for me how much we have come so far, but even not having these structures within the past 100 years has stunted women's voices and their ability to tell their stories. And I think that Virginia Woolf got across that point so powerfully. Half American by Matthew F. Delmont was another great look back at historical social injustice, specifically following Black American soldiers in World War II, as they were promised something by their country, and the US just didn't live up to those promises. They were not given the respect that they deserved or fair treatment in their role as soldiers, even though they were strong contributors to the war effort. I learned so much through this work that is almost a tapestry of different stories, trying to get across just how sweeping and broad the injustices were. So we are hearing about so many different types of scenarios, both at home and abroad during the war, that it was staggering. So much about the individual injustices in certain situations. There are some really heartbreaking stories of these soldiers doing their duty and going to places that were hostile to them, finding that being abroad may even be more favorable for them than certain postings at home. And that was heartbreaking to hear that the United States didn't really live up to all of the promises that we made to them for their service. So it was very powerful, and I think got across so much new information to me, so many anecdotes of the difficulties of these people's lives and the generational negative impacts that resulted from all of this treatment of these soldiers. So I just really was heavily affected by this one. River of Gods by Candice Millard is another fabulous historical nonfiction. We are following the 2 explorers who, before, during, and after the fact of going on an expedition looking for the source of the Nile in Africa. And this was very personal to me because I grew up on stories of explorers and missionaries going to these far-flung locations, and always in a very heroizing tone. And this was very different from that for me. Millard takes a much more balanced approach where she is acknowledging the effects of colonialism and imperialism on the place where they're journeying, and is also looking at the fact that, they did go through these great hardships and overcome so many things to accomplish this, but at the same time, they received a lot of individual credit for things that they shared the effort in, and in many ways, others were frequently more responsible for their actual success. So I just love the balanced approach that she brought to this work, and the minor details that she worked in made this a really compelling read. Next, I have two books actually that tackle the same topic, but from different approaches, and I enjoyed them both very, very much. So The Flag and the Cross by Philip Gorski and Samuel Perry, and American Idolatry by Andrew Whitehead. Both of these really hit the spot for me as introductory works on the topic of white Christian nationalism. And specifically, both of these books are establishing what that ideology looks like internally for someone who believes it, and the cognitive dissonance that is occurring there in that upholding of Christian values and nationalistic values. Specifically, kind of the aspects of supremacy and violence and power. Those are the major topics that come up in American Idolatry. Now, the first, The Flag and the Cross, is taking a more academic approach to look at this. It establishes what is the internal story someone has to tell themselves to hold these dueling ideas within them. And it looks at a lot of statistics and research into the topic about what those people believe, the things that they want from the country. And so there's a lot of charts, a lot of research and references there. So that is the more academic work on this. American Idolatry goes the exact opposite way and pulls from the Bible directly and specifically focuses on the words of Christ. And I think for me, this was the more powerful of the two books and the one I would push into more people's hands, because I feel like it really equipped me to talk to someone who holds that ideology about what exactly does the Bible say and how does that go at odds with the things that they're espousing as their ideals. So I'm someone who very much grew up in the church, in Christian evangelical circles that are most targeted by this ideology and this sort of line of thinking. And so I already was very steeped in understanding the biblical principles that are being talked through in this book. However, it framed so many things in simple, clear ways that I could bring up in conversation with someone, and I feel like this is probably the most powerful work that I have read that actually gives me actionable steps to talk with someone on this topic and attempt at deprogramming. I think it's something that would be very valuable for anyone who is in America specifically to read. This is a very niche topic, certainly, so I recognize that not everyone will be very interested in reading about it. It is a personal interest, but I think that increasingly, not just in the US, but worldwide, it is becoming more and more vital that we do have this toolkit of things that we can talk about on this topic with others as radicalization is increasing. And so I just thought this was very important reading for that aspect. Paradise Falls by Keith O'Brien is sort of corporate true crime that is gripping and compulsively readable, and I didn't expect that at all. I really didn't know what to think going in to this story about Love Canal, New York, which was a suburb built on top of a toxic waste dump that was the result of a lack of regulation and corporate malfeasance, lack of oversight by the builders for the people who inhabited this little suburban community. And so many things about why this was so compelling to read are because O'Brien's choices in how he wrote this. He did choose to focus the lives of the people affected and all of the people who were working to help rather than a lot of the negatives. Those are certainly very much present. There are so many hard-hitting moments and emotional, really difficult times reading through this. A lot of people get sick and die as a result of chemical exposure. And the fight to be heard is what he centers in this story, that these people are working and doing their best. And so much about establishing regulations and the politics involved is told in a way that is so empathetic and is believable and true to a lot of things we see with bureaucratic red tape today, and how politically we can make a positive difference. In this book, we very much see the beginnings of the EPA and what a positive effect that had on this situation. So it made me feel a little politically hopeful in a time when we've not had a lot of hopeful politics. The choices were so smart, so well executed, that I read this for the BookTube Prize in 2023, and it wound up my first ranked book. So I would pretty much recommend it to just about anybody, because I think most people would get something out of it. Everything that I've talked about so far is very difficult, heavy reading, so I want to wrap up with some more light, joyful reads that I have in nonfiction. And the first is Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire, and the subtitle is The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller. That tells you everything you need to know about what this book is. It is also a really beautiful little physical object. So if you've seen the cover, that's barely touching the surface of how lovely it is. It's a nice little unique object. So interior content, though, it's also quite charming. It is such a delight to read these little vignettes from the life of a rare bookseller, and Oliver Darkshire is an unusual character for that. He kind of fell into the job, I guess, working at a rare antiquarian bookshop in England, and he is a big burly guy covered in tattoos. He's a lot younger than the typical antiquarian bookseller, and so he talks about that experience and really apprenticing to get into this job, what that entailed, and the misadventures, as it says in the subtitle. He very lushly gives us these snippets of the day-to-day life working in an antiquarian bookshop full of dusty books, the basic care of those, the unusual characters who we were likely to encounter working in a rare bookshop, the traipsing across the countryside to go look at books at estates, things like that. All the mundane details are told in such a delightful way. So I think this one just won me over, and I really would read just about anything else he writes about this topic. I could definitely see reading this in the future. And the last book on my nonfiction list is one that I think is going to be showing up on an awful lot of best of lists. And for me, it's the only one on this or any list that I read not once, but twice in 2023 because I enjoyed it so much. And that's An Immense World by Ed Yong. Of course I had to have it here. I think everyone has loved this book that has read it. It is a very me book, though. It's really focused on nature and animals. These are topics I love. And this is such a joyful book. It is about the wonder and delight of discovery and of difference in perception. So this is about getting out of our human perception and looking at how animals perceive the world differently from us. And this is truly full of the nerding out about science, about discovering new aspects of how animals perceive the world, about how we can research that and how we can understand that through our own limited perception. So I loved that this took a look at and respected the animals that it was considering, and it recognized that we are limited. We are not supreme in many ways. There are all of these creatures that have so many adaptable traits that better equip them for the world than us in certain ways, and things that we could potentially use as discoveries to better ourselves. I just loved the geeking out of this because Yong himself is so passionate and excited about all of these topics that he brings that, and it's infectious. But he also works to pull in expert sources who are also doing groundbreaking work in their fields, and they have carved out tiny niches for themselves of being very passionate about one area of science or one animal, and really delving into that and discovering new things about that animal. And so that brings their passion into it. So he has a plethora of scientists and specialists in their field who are really joyful. So I thought that this was such a wonderful book on its own, very well researched, very easy to read. As someone who doesn't have a great biology background, I really didn't struggle with any of the content. And the fact that I also picked it up again on audio, which is read by Yong, and his passion again comes through even more when you listen to him read the book. And he is a great narrator. I think he could have a career in audio narration if he decides to leave science. And with that, we have finished my favorite nonfiction books read in 2023. I am so excited to have this out in the world so that maybe some of you will pick up the books that I read and loved. If you are thinking about picking something up and you have questions, please feel free to ask in the comments down below. I'm happy to answer questions about any of these. And I also did talk about these books individually throughout the year, so I will link below my individual reviews from my weekly catch-ups or single book reviews I did in the past so that you can check those out and hear more about the books if you are interested. So that is it. I will be coming back with a lengthy fiction best of list sometime soon. And I am really curious, especially if you have a nonfiction favorites list. But if you have done your favorites, please let me know and shoot me a link in the comments, because I am definitely looking for what everyone has loved this year so that I can kind of follow and be influenced by everyone else's favorites. So that's it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.